welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica, and I'm here with...
This is Sharon.
Megan.
And...
Cody.
Cody, and we're here on Syosset Library, Turn the Page. And Cody, would you like to tell us why you're here today?
Sure. My name's Cody Meirick. I'm director, producer of a new documentary now available on VOD, and it's coming on DVD in July. It's called Scary Stories. It's a documentary, full-length documentary about scary stories to tell in the dark, which is a book series that many people remember very fondly. Were published between 1981 and 1991, so it's kind of a nostalgia title for a lot of people. Collection of short, scary stories for kids. And it's also one of the most banned or challenged children's books of the last 40 years. So we touch on a lot of things. Certainly it's stories of urban legends and folklore. So we definitely delve into that. We also touch on the illustrations, which many people who remember distinctly about the books, and but also we talk a bit about censorship and a lot of things dealing with how we come to challenge books in America and in general. And so we delve into a lot of different things, and
When we started talking after we saw the documentary, I think that was one of the things that struck all of us was how much it was about
the censorship and about the whole process of when a book is challenged, what does the librarian do? I found that really interesting.
As librarians, I think that really it spoke to all of us, because I think we've all at least once had somebody question. I don't know. We
directly challenged. We've had questions or complaints or something. But these books definitely with the illustrations, I think that just struck a chord with a lot of parents that maybe weren't so comfortable with their kids getting scared.
I mean, Cody, when did you first encounter these books?
I'm like a lot of people. When the third book came out in 1991, I was 11 years old. So I definitely read these when I was a kid, and read a lot of Goosebumps, R.L. Stine's in the documentary, and a lot of other similar titles. And I definitely had a similar experience to a lot of people. Books like these were the ones that I started reading and started getting into reading at that ideal age, ages 8 to 12 basically. And so I kind of is probably similar to a lot of the people, though. I'm sure I moved on and I didn't think about them for maybe a decade. And then in my 20s, with the rise of the internet, people, nostalgically say, "Hey, remember these?" And oh yeah, of course, I remember those, that sort of thing. And I re-remember them as an adult, like a lot of people. And then, when I kind of early on decided, this was 5 years ago, it was a long journey putting this documentary together. Early on, the idea was to kind of do a documentary about the importance of literacy, right? That was kind of the undercurrent, but typically what you want is some kind of, story to tell that delivers that idea, right? And so I thought of these books, and it just gelled, right? There's all these different things that could be explored, but ultimately the end result is a message about, okay, at least we got kids reading, and the joke I sometimes make with these is, now we can look at how all these people who grew up with these books are now as adults, and most of the time they didn't turn out to be homicidal maniacs. I mean, yes, they like scary things, and then they moved on to read, Stephen King or other scary books, but they're now, librarians, and they're now musicians and artists and all these things, So it generally had a positive effect on them, not a negative one, and so it starts to question, why we, take these books off the shelves altogether if these particular books are the most challenged and had a positive effect on a lot of people. You start to question that sort of thing.
What about you, Sharon and Meghan? When do you remember first?
Well, I mean, it's funny. After Jessica told me we were doing the podcast, I did some digging in my house, and I actually found my own copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark with my little handwriting in it. That even says like, if found, put in lost and found, because I was very concerned as a child of losing this book. So I definitely, read it. It was a well-loved copy, and the images just really, they stuck with me. So like that, I think, I don't know. In my elementary school, we had a librarian who used to dress up for Halloween as like a fortune teller, and she made the library dark and mysterious, and we read scary stories, and that just like left such an indelible like mark on me that it was okay to read scary stories in school, and she really was into it. So I guess that was a different. Definitely a different approach than some of the stuff I saw in the documentary with, these challenges and the superintendents and all that. But I just have such a strong memory of reading these books from, back in the 80s and 90s. And so how about you, Megan? Do you remember?
So my first experience with these books was in 2nd or 3rd grade, and I completely devoured them. I loved how it combined folklore concepts. And as a young kid, I was just so curious about reading about horror, and there weren't that many books I felt like available to me, but I credit my school library for providing the books and having them there because I love them.
I used to go on vacation to Lake George with my family, and every night, because there was no electricity where we went, my family would read from these books, and I was the biggest scaredy cat on the face of the planet. And sometimes I would be afraid to sit around the fire and listen, but then I'd end up in the cabin outside of where the fire is listening from the window. So, I was like, in a way, it was like I was scared to listen to them, and the pictures definitely added something because Steve Gammell, I mean, that he is so distinct.
If you've seen the art, you know you can't ever forget.
Yes, but I grew to really just love them, and it got to me as a librarian that I started doing scary story programs at the end of the summer where I'd read from them to kids, and kids still love them. I would have them make s'mores with marshmallow fluff and chocolate frosting on graham crackers, and by the end of the night, like, none of the books were on our shelves again because every child who came to that program either wanted one or wanted me to get one from somewhere else.
Yeah, those books really. It's just a long.
One of the things I probably remembered more than anything, thinking back at these books. Yes, of course, I remember the illustrations, and I could, if you had, of course, at this point, I know the stories inside and out pretty much. But early on, kind of remembering these books from childhood. I could probably pick out a couple of the stories and that sort of thing. But one of the things that stuck out to me was the source material, right?
Oh, yes.
You had Alvin Schwartz, who was kind of more a researcher than anything else. And so, he was really, he did other books that dealt with folklore in different ways and stuff. He kind of, to some degree, stumbled on the idea, kids love scary things. Well, let's let's collect only scary
To be
folklore.
honest with you, I'm sorry to cut you off just really quickly. Like, one of his books that traumatized me the most wasn't even one of these. It was his the one for the younger children in a dark, dark room with the green ribbon story.
I heard that over and over again.
I was so,
Yes,
I
the
mean,
green
just
ribbon.
that story, just, and it's folklore, right?
Yes. Yes.
I think it's a traditional tale, the green ribbon.
Yes, yeah. Yes, that didn't have quite the same source material that, to some degree, Scary Stories to Tell in
Right.
Dark. Those books had those kind of lengthy source materials in the back of the books that actually got thicker and thicker as the series went on.
Yes.
Because, I think that was Alvin Schwartz's, general interest was, the folklore aspect. So he kind of, went into more and more depth. And that was one of the things I remember the most, partially because you just didn't see that. It's like, it kind of respected kids enough to say, hey, here's a scary story. Great. A lot of kids are naturally interested in that. But for other kids who really want to delve into it, here's all this source material. You can, this story connects to this country from this, this time frame, and it deals with these themes. One of the stories that comes up often is the story of Harold, right? The scarecrow doll type thing that comes alive and does bad things, right? But in the source material, it's like, okay, this is similar to Frankenstein, right? This is similar to the Golem of Jewish tradition and that sort of thing. I mean, even though I'm imparting this scary story about, some murderous character named Harold, it has connections to all these other stories that are very traditional. And I distinctly remember moving on to Frankenstein. I read Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, shortly after reading these books because, okay, this is a classic and it's also scary and it's beautiful. So, it was very advanced for that, for my age. But I loved it, Yeah, I mean, the source material was one of those things that, like, me being kind of the nerdy, bookish type, that's one of the things I kind of distinctly remember and opened my eyes a little bit.
In the documentary, there was the whole, talking about the challenge that I forget her name, the librarian, actually used the source material as a justification for why she should keep some of these collections on the shelf. That was part of her argument, was that, these folklores represent, different cultures and different, so that there's nothing else in my collection. You can say there are 10,000 books in the library, but these are the only books that actually, fill that sort of void. And
I tried also, when I did my discussion, when I used to read them at the end of the summer, I brought that in. Like, I'd always, and I felt like it developed some critical thinking in the children. I'd be like, okay, so we have these stories about people, like you have the Viper and the babysitter, like calling on the phone, why? And of course now, they're just like, oh, well, why didn't she just look up who called? But I'd be like, okay, so when do you think these stories would come about? And they're just like, oh, when everybody had a telephone in there, because of course, like now you can just like, oh, he's calling from inside the house. Everyone's got their cell phone on them. Like you can call your friend from inside the house.
It's not the same scary.
it's different. But the kids did like that.
And
they
many
liked
of these
the
stories,
source.
So many of these stories, you can look at when they originated, and you can look at the fears that are kind of innate in the story, and it tells you a bit. I mean, some of them have to do with, the guy with the hook, which, everyone knows that, it kind of had a life of its own outside of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but you can look at stories like that. And okay, when did it come up? Well, it came up in the 50s and 60s when teenagers were just starting to get cars and go park and make out and so on and so forth. So okay, let's make up a guy with a hook who's going to come for you if you go park at Lover's Lane and that sort of thing. And a number of other stories have to do with, the guy in the back seat.
Yes,
right?
that's a good one. And there's been so many variations of that.
Yeah. Yes, but it also touches on, okay, when did it come about? It was at a time when more and more young people were driving, and we need to, let's have no doubt parents. Let's make up some stories that they're urban legends, and they oftentimes didn't happen or never happened quite in that way. But let's add a element of fear to the fact that so people will be a little more cautious, and that's what a lot of these are, cautionary tales. Hansel and Gretel, of course, is a very classic cautionary tale about trusting strangers and stuff. So there's no real difference between these and a lot of Grimm's fairy tales that have become a huge part of our culture.
You've even got something like Oh, Susanna in the books, which is one of those college tales, going away to college and being in a dorm. And I remember so many, stories about, like the roommate who ended up murdered and they were in your room the whole time, or there were stories circulating. I know Sharon and I went to college around the same time, about how somebody just saw on Oprah that a psychic predicted there's going to be a mass murder at a college dorm that looks like the letter H, and almost every college dorm that was built around the same, had similar structures. So of course everybody automatically thought it was their college. But in the Oh, Susanna story, that was. Would you like to talk a little bit about that one?
Sure. Yeah. So Oh, Susanna, it's one of those stories that it definitely had a little bit of a life before Scary Stories to Tell in Dark, but it was this particular book series introduced a lot of kids to that particular story, right? There's the college student who comes back to their class, to their dorm room with their roommate. The roommate's asleep. So they go ahead and go to sleep, and they keep humming "Oh, Susanna," throughout the night. And they keep saying, "Hey, shut up, whatever, just go to sleep," so on and so forth. And find out in the morning, their roommate has been killed. And oh gosh, I in some way where there's no way they could have been humming "Oh, Susanna," they must have been dead the whole time, type of thing. There's a variation of it that Alvin Schwartz, I believe, mentions, and I always think of as the variation where someone is licking your hand. Your hand is off on the side of the bed, and someone keeps licking it.
That's a really scary one.
Dog.
Yeah.
Licking hand, and it turns out to be, I don't know, a homicidal maniac or something licking their hand or something. There's variations of it, but there's all kinds of those urban legends. Okay, we're going to send our kid to college. We need to have we need to arm them with some stories to guard them and make sure they're going to take care of themselves. So here's some urban legends and so on and so forth, and they get passed around. And in fact, Oh, Susanna is one of those where I remember the illustration distinctly from these books, partially because it had nothing to do with the story, and that's an interesting aspect. And I felt like Stephen Gammell got more and more comfortable with illustrating these books. So throughout the series, he got a little more and more crazy with. I say crazy. I mean, they're beautiful, but they're more and more surreal, I guess you could say. And Susanna one's a good example.
I can't actually divorce his other illustrations from when he did other books now from these, because even though they're colorful and they're less terrifying, his style is so distinct. But we're also talking a little bit about what our favorite books what our favorite stories in the series are. I know Sharon was.
Yeah, it's funny you were talking about the illustrations. I was flipping through that wonderful sausage illustration where the hand is eating from its arm, and just getting myself kind of grossed out. But as far as the stories themselves, I always that Room for One More. That one, it begins with the elevator.
Oh, and there's a Twilight Zone version of that one too, which is one of my favorite episodes. The Room for One More. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it actually? Wait. Does it start with? I know there's an elevator in it, but I think it actually was it a car ride it begins with, and they're trying to, the guy's face is all the sunken eyes.
He wakes up in the middle of the night and he thinks he sees a hearse.
Oh, is that what
we have the books in
We're
front of us,
mangling-
Cody,
we're
but if you
mangling
would
the
like to
story, Cody.
help
us out here. Do you remember that one in particular? I just remember the elevator part of that, where it's like, he decides not to take that elevator, and
because the operator of the operator of the elevator looks like the operator of the hearse from his dream, and then it turns out that the elevator crashes and everybody on the elevator dies. So it was like a prophetic dream.
Right. That one creeped me out a lot, and that I don't know. Did you have a favorite when you were either of you? Or?
Oh, Megan.
I'm just Aaron Kelly's Bones as a kid. That one really freaked me out because now as an adult, I'm thinking that's very much like almost like the monkey's paw, with the dead body coming back and not realizing that they're dead. And I just think that was a really just creepy image in the beginning of that, with the person with their bones falling off and their limbs falling off. So as a kid, that definitely creeped me out a lot.
And for me,
yeah, one thing my experience has been an interesting one, because what I found is, so there's over 80 stories, a few songs, but mostly stories, short stories, and what I found is when I get people talking about these books, they immediately jump to one or two or three of the ones that really, they remember. They created a fear, lifelong fear to some degree, or a scenario always happens and they always think of that. If someone flashes the car lights behind them, they immediately think of the story where the killer's in the back seat, sort of thing, so on and so forth. They have these things that happen in their life and they immediately think of one of these stories. But the interesting thing I found is that there's no one or two stories that everyone remembers the most. Not really. And that was a bit of a challenge for me, because, okay, how am I going to do a documentary and kind of touch on a number of these stories when there's over 80 of them? I'm not going to be able to, delve into every single one. So we kind of had to, do the best we could, for sure. But there's a lot of them, right? And different people had different experiences really being affected by a lot of them. And it is, like I said, it's not just two or three that everyone remembers. There's at least a dozen, 24 that, people very fondly remember as, okay, this story stuck with me.
You know which one I always loved, and it has a really interesting history, and it's been, I don't know if it's hearsay on the internet or if it's been confirmed, but the drum, I've heard rumors that it influenced Neil Gaiman to write Coraline, and that's the one where the two girls meet, the gypsy girl in the middle of the field playing this extraordinary drum, and she convinces them to be bad. And her mother, yes.
The Other Mother is another way of putting it.
Yes, Lucy Clifford, I think wrote Gaiman, that. Yeah, it was the original cautionary tale from Victorian times. But go on, you were saying Neil Gaiman.
Yeah. So he credits The Other Mother, which is essentially another variation of the drum. But yes, it's definitely one of those cautionary tales. A setup somewhat similar to Hansel and Gretel, where you've got oftentimes a brother and sister going to town, and they meet. In this case, in the story of the drum and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, it's a gypsy girl. And one thing we kind of delve into in the documentary is that we didn't talk specifically about this story, but it's definitely one that kind of actually we did touch on it a little, but kind of reinforces this idea. Okay, why is it a gypsy girl?
Exactly,
right?
Like the outsiders are dangerous and that type of yes, like. I think in the documentary you talked about the Mexican pet, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, so many of these stories is oftentimes kids or just people in general either going somewhere they're not familiar with, or someone new is coming to town, and that's scary, right? They're unusual. In some cases we touch on it was during shortly after the Civil War, so it's a North and South thing, right? Okay, some people coming from the South, and that's they could be our enemy, that sort of thing. Other times it's someone from a foreign land, right? The Mexican hairless is a good example of an innate fear of people coming from Mexico, basically, right? Which isn't at all pertinent to our current discussion.
Right, of course. No, but we get
right.
But it is true that it was very clear that it was a gypsy girl, and it was always unclear as to whether or not she knew that the other mother was going to come. But honestly, what really scared me about the book was just that their mother was replaced by this horrifying being with glass eyes and a wooden tail, which literally makes no sense. Whenever I read that one to the kids, and sometimes I'd skip around and then I'd find some other stories, but whenever that was like, they loved that one, and the Green Ribbon were the ones they always wanted to hear, but because they just kind of were scary in a sense that there was really no explanation. Like, why glass eyes and a wooden tail?
Sure. An interesting thing about that is, I've gone back and read the source material, the original or a previous version of that story, one of the ones that's credited often, and it goes on. Like the
mother actually interacts with them in that one, right? In this one, she's just there, but in the original,
yes, exactly. I mean, and there's something to be said for it being particularly effective because it stops there, right? They get home and their mother has been replaced by this creature, their other mother, their so on and so forth, and it just kind of ends. And there's something. You could argue it's pretty effective because it ends there, right?
Her wooden tail is thumping against the floor, and there's always like that. You can add that little, if you're telling the story, you can add that little thump, thump, thump with your hand. But I do think. What do you guys think about ending a story at the?
I like, there's that whole section of those like jump stories, or like the ones that that have that like sudden kind of ending, and I think those are so great for story time. I mean, like, it's this built-in scary ending that just gets the kids jumping out of their skins, which is so fun. So I really like those.
And I think it's great because it furthers your imagination. It makes you think, like, you can make your own interpretation of the ending, and you can discuss it with your friends, because we used to discuss these books all the time and what we thought happened. So.
And with again, it's one of Alvin Schwartz's younger books, but with the Green Ribbon, like, it just ends. Her head fell off. Like, she takes off the ribbon and her head fell off. The end. Like,
you can't argue with that.
You can't argue with that, and everybody's like, "What?"
Yeah, the catching you by surprise.
And it's such a simplistic, like, that just it's so fitting for kids because, like, someone's head falling off is something that just, like, it's not overly complicated. It's effective, and it's something a kid can visualize, and it's something that I can imagine a kid talking about. His head's gonna fall off, I mean, that's just it's perfect for kids because it talks to them in a way that's
Megan and I actually know somebody who has cosplayed at Comic-Con as Jenny from the Green Ribbon.
That's great. I was going to say, did you ever use it as a prop? Like, do you ever show up to Storytime with a green ribbon?
No, but I should.
Think you should.
Oh my God! Why did I never think of that? I think
just like, don't mention it.
Just be like, and by the way, but I did see a meme online about a month ago where it was something like, you don't marry for love, you don't marry for money, you marry to find out if the green ribbon around her neck is gonna cause her head to come off.
That's great.
So it's real.
One of the stories. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the stories has kind of grown to be one of my favorites. Is the first story from the first book that many people remember fondly, which is The Big Toe, which is it's synonymous with the Golden Arm story. It basically, if you look it up, you'll quickly see that there's a whole tradition of the Golden Arm stories. It's become a trope, and it's been done. You can vary it up in all kinds of different ways. The big toe is just one iteration of it, but it's become, because of scary stories to tell in the dark, become probably the most told version of the Golden Arm, tale. This is, a kid comes across a toe sticking out of the ground, and he pulls it out.
Because that's what you do.
Oh, definitely.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, of course you would do that. And you take it home, and of course, what would you do? You would cook it and serve it up for dinner.
Yum, yum.
And so they eat it. They eat the toe, which is it's silly and kind of definitely Grimm's fairy tales ish. Like, okay, this just seems like a silly thing you would tell to a kid, but also an undercurrent there is like, okay, farmers at a certain time, they would forage, and they would eat whatever they could come up with, right? Because their means probably weren't ideal, and so on and so forth. Anyways, so they cook it up and eat it, the toe, and that night, a voice comes, who's got my toe? And it gets closer and closer, and it's a and at the end, yes, it's that jump scare. You got it, And this one in particular became part of its appeal or popularity came from actually Mark Twain. Mark Twain used the Golden Arm story as he would go around from campus to campus and kind of use and wrote about the fact that this story was a good example of how important it is how you tell a story, right? The way I just told it wasn't great because I was just kind of telling it. But if you're a good storyteller, you can turn that simple tale and it can be the scariest thing in the world because you're going to incorporate, okay, this happened to my cousin who lives, in the town next. You remember this person, so on. It's their cousin. You start incorporating
the friend of the friend
right.
folklore,
yes,
which
exactly, and you build it up, and how you tell it is the most important thing to that story because you're gonna add the suspense and you're gonna build it up and so on, and then there's that release at the end. You've got it. But yeah, it's kind of become one of my favorites, partially because I like the idea that okay, it's not just what happens in the story; it's how you tell it.
I think there was in the documentary they talk about children hiding these books when they took them home because I guess they might have thought that these were not things that their parents would be happy with them reading. How did it feel to interview the people, including Alvin Schwartz's son, who were central to the whole kerfuffle of trying to ban these books?
Well, it was an interesting experience for sure. I mean, some of the things were on the easy side, which is to say, this is a popular book series, and it wasn't that difficult to get people talking about these books, and and even getting scholars and folklorists, they get it, right? They get that. Okay, yes, these are just scary tales for kids, but there's a lot of benefit to them, and they're an introduction to all kinds of things that benefit kids as they delve deeper into the stories that are in the books and that sort of thing. So some of those were, but yes, the censorship piece was, oh gosh, yeah, it was what I ended up doing, although it was interesting to kind of look at a number of different cases of these books being challenged and that sort of thing. What I ended up doing was, okay, it's not enough just to mention that it was challenged in this school or that school and that sort of thing. I wanted to find a particular case that made national attention, and let's delve into that. And it just so happened it was in the Seattle area, and Peter Schwartz, son of Alvin Schwartz, he lives in the Seattle area, so that just became a really great opportunity to say, okay, let's delve into that case, and let's find the person who was at the forefront of that. And in fact, there was a big piece in New York Times when Alvin Schwartz passed away back in the early 90s, and she was quoted in that, it was a very, if you Google Alvin Schwartz, one of the first things you're going to come across is this big New York Times article just after he passed. Who is Alvin Schwartz, and why do people want to ban his books, right? And she at that time was the most prominent person, getting on talk shows and, railing against, these books aren't appropriate and so on and so forth. So I tracked her down, and it wasn't that easy because her name had changed and she moved and so on and so forth. But,
is that because of the national attention that her name had changed, or?
People ask me, why, what's the number one reason why these books were challenged? And certainly there's aspects of, the illustrations were, were easily, you could point to, certainly specific things that happen in stories that had violence and that sort of thing. Yes, all that were factors, but I would say the number one reason is they were popular. They were wildly popular, and kids wanted to. You talk about kids, hiding them under the, covers and that sort of thing. Yes, that's a perfect demonstration of the fact that kids wanted to read these books, and they were being passed around and talked about. These books aren't on the top 10 list as much anymore, mostly because, they were published so long ago, and so there's other books that take that. But it's always books that happen to be the most popular. Harry Potter. That's often tops on the list. One of my son's favorite is Captain Underpants. It's usually one of the top ones nowadays, and it wouldn't be if it weren't incredibly popular. My kid loves those books, and so I think popularity is oftentimes the number one reason, right? I mean, yes, you can point to, things that are in those books that are the cause of the challenges, but no one would notice if they weren't popular.
Go ahead, Megan.
So when I was a kid, I didn't really feel like I had to hide the books, but they were always like in my backpack if I needed to reference them. And I did notice that the kids, what they did do was earmark some of the pages of their favorite stories many times. And one of those stories, which I really like, is The Viper. Mm-hmm. I just think it's great. Like, it's got humor, horror, and it's just like the whole Dracula feel to it. I want to wipe the windows. And yeah, I guess with the whole telephone situation, the kids today would maybe question that. But
they still love it, though. I will say, I mean, they do a little bit, but they still love it. And but Bloody Fingers is another one that's got kind of a little bit of humor in it. With the ghost.
Yeah, and that's, the ones that have humor in it, I don't know. I heard, I would hear a number of people that, those were the ones they remember the most, were the ones that ended up with kind of a jokey thing. It was actually a minority of the stories. Like, there were only a handful of them.
I can't think of another one other than those two.
Yeah. Oh gosh, those are definitely a couple of the more prominent ones. I usually think of the Viper as Wait Until Martin Comes.
Oh, my husband is terrified of that one. He thinks it's the scariest one.
Yeah. I mean, and that's I think it, and something along the lines of you wait here for him, I'm getting out of here type thing. There's a number of those that if you put it in amongst all these other stories that are definitely more on the scary side. Okay, let's give you one that's just a jokey, thing. It's a nice, it mixes the stories up enough.
It's a break, yes.
And yeah, exactly.
There's also one of the ones I always thought was really scary was the dream where the woman, she's an artist and she's traveling and she's gonna go someplace and has a bad dream about the hotel she's gonna stay in, so she goes to a different place. but that place is actually the hotel where the scary things happen. And again, it's one of the ones that just ends, when it gets to that point, which leaves so much more to the imagination. But I remember when I was doing that story recently, I think like 2 summers ago, because it takes place in upstate New York. Now, was Alvin Schwartz from this area?
New Jersey, the Princeton area, and I traveled there and kind of visited. So yes, he would have known the New Jersey / New York area pretty well. But he also traveled and so he definitely tried to incorporate stories from all over the place and like to kind of get different stories from different lands, essentially.
Because I remember I was reading it and I was traveling up to a wedding near Kingston. And I'm like, oh, I'm staying in Kingston. Even like in my 30s, be like, yeah, that's a little creepy. And I know this is totally fiction, but I'm still creeped out by this.
But is it really totally fiction?
Well, that's, yeah. I mean, folklore in general, it comes from word of mouth, I guess. I don't know. Folklore isn't considered. It's not cataloged in the fiction section.
No, a little librarian.
Yeah.
We put it with nonfiction.
But yeah.
One of the reasons why I still would come back to these books, even as an adult, is the whole folklore aspect and how it's a way to root us back to our past, and just the horror genre in general is something that I connect with, and I think it connects people of all ages. So I think it's not harmful to kids. I think it is helpful for them, and it keeps you talking.
And it keeps you thinking.
Yeah, I mean, what I tend to think about is the fact that, adults are interested in the horror genre, but if I could ask any single one of them, where did that love begin? It started in childhood, right? That it's just kind of naturally when we start to, challenge ourselves with scarier and scarier things, right? My son, who is about to turn 9 years old, he's still he's not much for the scary stuff, right?
Yeah, I have an 8-year-old too. No.
Yeah, exactly. Has no interest. It's superheroes. It's Pokemon and all that stuff. Anything that's too scary, he's not for it, which is perfectly fine, right? You challenge them in little ways, but generally speaking, if they're not interested in scary stuff at that point, great. They may never get interested in scary stuff, and that's perfectly fine too, right? The tricky part of it is, okay, my kid isn't interested in scary stories. Now I'm going to go to his elementary school. Am I going to, keep it out of the entire library so that, other kids that maybe would be interested don't have the same access to these books? No, I wouldn't do that. So, the joke I sometimes say is, we live in a society, right? So we live in a society, and we're sending all our kids to a lot of the same, these same public schools and so on. So we have to come up with, really we need to have a discussion on, okay, how do we monitor these things? Because we're all, parents, and we all have different comfort levels and so on and so forth. But, we have to send our kids to the same school. So, what I tend to, who I respect is the librarians who are in the middle of this and have to deal with things and are on the front lines, and they're the ones that have to initially deal with parents oftentimes, and it varies how prepared they are for these types of issues when they come. And oftentimes the American Library Association says it just kind of quietly happens, right? A parent has a problem with a book a certain amount of time, it's just quietly taken off the shelves without any discussion. And that's what I think I'm pointing to is the fact that there's a problem there, right? There's no discussion being had, and oftentimes it's a book that has a lot of
People find people can find something about almost any book, honestly. I mean, there's some, like, if you look at the banned list, I mean, we've all done that, right?
They're absurd reasons throughout,
Yeah, like everything from talking animals aren't appropriate to, like, it could be like the most cult. It could be the most innocent book about a character who's a witch, and they're like, it's witchcraft. It's, like, oh, it's well, and it's just like, really, because like it's really the sweetest, most innocent book on the face of the planet, and like you're what? So really, I mean, there's really anybody can find a reason to challenge a book for any reason.
Right. That's why it's so important
Sure.
to have some sort of policy and steps to take when that happens. Yeah.
One story that didn't quite make the cut of the documentary, but I thought it was interesting and poignant is, a librarian who talked about a particular time where a parent was, volunteering in the library, like happens all the time, but that sort of thing. And a parent just started collecting all these books, making a pile that were going to be, donated or given away or out of the library, or incinerated, who knows. But started making a pile of books to get rid of, and there were any books that had a witch in it. Like, okay, it's not appropriate for any story to have a witch in it because that has to do with witchcraft.
Which
right?
I think is Harry Potter, like, over and over again is what people complain about in Harry Potter.
Yes, yeah, that's one of
Yep.
them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, a good example, a book that, I think of, a recent one would be Room on the Broom, which is, this, has won awards and so on.
My
and so forth.
boys
Yes, it has a witch
love
on it.
Room on the Broom. They love it.
and there's a lot of really great concepts going on in that one simple story of these animals kind of getting on this broom and is their room. And I mean, it's mathematical. It has to do with, all kinds of concepts that you can kind of introduce at a young age in a really well done children's book. But yes, it has a witch in it.
And she's kind.
So
she encourages the animals to make room on the broom so they can all fly together, and then in the end they do her a good turn. It's really there's also an animation, I think, that's been on Netflix. I think Gillian Anderson might have a lot. There's a lot of voices in it. What's his name from Shaun of the Dead? Simon Pegg has a voice in it.
Really?
Yeah. But that's interesting. I didn't know that Room on the Broom was causing a stir, pun intended.
Well, I mean, if you're going to toss any story that has a witch in it, well, then you're taking away, what I consider one of the more popular and useful, interesting books to introduce. Yes, around Halloween time when kids are naturally talking about it, but has a lot of great concepts that you can kind of pull out and get kids introduced to.
So we're getting close to wrapping. So does anybody have anything they want to add, Megan or Sharon?
Real quick, there was a section in the documentary where they showed the woman who was getting the sleeve of tattoos and, the artwork. And there was just such an interesting fandom to see in the documentary. And just like, the collection of people you brought together and were able to get interviews and clips from, I enjoyed seeing that. That was really cool.
The art gallery where they made like 3D images of Steve Gammell's.
There's so much to talk about. But yes. Really, you did a wonderful job of mixing, the stories with the images and bringing it all to life. And the 3D images and the tattoos, it was visually stunning. It was really cool to see. So I just wanted to thank you for that because I really enjoyed it.
And I really
thanks.
I really appreciated in the documentary that you took a very critical analysis. You had people on both sides of the issue, so it wasn't just people that beloved the books. Like, there was topic for discussion, and I think that was great.
Do you have any thoughts about the upcoming feature film?
I think it looks great. I mean, I love the people involved. I've actually been in a little contact with the director and stuff. And, I think what I would say is whether you're doing a documentary or an adaptation of the books, it's a tricky thing no matter what, right? It's a nostalgia title, and so I respect people even taking a crack at it because it's tricky, and again, I'd say it's over 80 stories. You're not gonna touch on every single one. So I think, I've been impressed with, you're keeping it scary. It's going to be, the trailers look, they're
Harold
like,
Yeah, Harold. I think one of our friends said, Harold, heck no. Just noping the heck out of there. That's is it Guillermo del Toro? He really he makes monsters and art, which the original artwork.
Right. It just seems like a really great marriage of images and imagery, and
whether or not
and keeping it practical. I mean, I'm a fan of that when they can, keep it looking like you can reach out and touch it type stuff.
Or Harold's going to reach out and touch you.
Yep.
And I thought it was one last thing about the illustrations. I was unaware that Stephen Gammell was so private. Is he still of our world?
Yes. Kind of a long story, but yes, he kind of, and I've uncovered a certain amount. And what I have in the documentary is a interview he did a long time ago. But generally speaking, the last 30 years, he has kind of wanted his art to speak for itself, sort of thing. And I had some indirect contact with him and that sort of thing.
It speaks volumes.
It screams. Oh, thank you so much, Cody. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
And everybody who's listening, I urge you to check out the documentary. Once again, what's it called? Where can it be found? When will it be on DVD?
So Scary Stories, you can find it. It's on all the major VOD platforms right now, and the DVD is available for pre-order on Amazon right now, and it comes out July 16th. But you can stream it right now if you get on one of your more popular VOD platforms. And yeah,
very cool.
Very cool, Cody. Thank you so much. And we are going to close.
Thank you.
We're going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.